The stench hit them first. Detective Marcus Williams had been working homicides in East St. Louis for 12 years, but nothing had prepared him for what awaited behind the peeling door of apartment 4B in the John DeShields housing complex. It was September 23, 2006, and what should have been a routine welfare check was about to become the most horrific crime scene of his career. "We're looking for pictures of the kids," Williams had told his partner that morning. "Media needs something to help with the search." 3 children, ages 7, 2, and 10 months, had been missing for nearly a week. Their mother, 23-year-old Jamela Tunstall, had been found brutally murdered in a vacant lot, her unborn child cut from her womb with a pair of scissors. But as Williams pushed open the apartment door, the overwhelming smell of death told him they were too late for a rescue mission. The children weren't missing anymore. They were exactly where their killer had left them, stuffed into the very appliances their mother had used to wash their clothes and keep them fed. 2 small bodies crammed into the washing machine. A third, the baby, wedged into the dryer like discarded laundry. What made the discovery even more chilling was the realization that police had been in this apartment just 24 hours earlier, searching for clues. They had walked past these machines, inches away from the decomposing bodies of 3 innocent children, completely unaware of the horror hidden within. But perhaps the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The woman who had committed these unthinkable acts wasn't a stranger. She was Jamela's best friend since childhood, the woman she trusted with her children's lives, the person she considered a sister. Her name was Tiffany Hall, and her betrayal would shake a community already numb to violence. 6 days earlier. September 16, 2006, started like any other day in East St. Louis. The sun rose over a city that had seen better decades, casting long shadows across empty lots where houses once stood and children once played. In the maze of public housing that dominates the landscape, mothers were getting their children ready for school, unaware that before the day ended, for young lives would be brutally extinguished. Jamela Tunstall was 7 months pregnant and glowing with anticipation. At 23, she had finally found her footing after years of struggle. Her 3 children, Demond, Ivan, and baby Janella, were the center of her world, and the daughter growing in her belly represented hope for a brighter future. That afternoon, she made a decision that would cost her everything. She agreed to visit her best friend Tiffany Hall. By evening, Jamela had vanished without a trace. The first sign something was wrong came from an unexpected source. Around 9 p.m., emergency dispatch received a frantic call from Frank Holton Park. A young woman claimed she had just given birth to a stillborn baby girl in the park and needed immediate medical attention. When paramedics arrived, they found 24-year-old Tiffany Hall, blood-stained and hysterical, cradling what appeared to be a newborn infant. But something about the scene felt wrong. Tiffany's story kept changing, first claiming she had been sexually assaulted, then denying it. When doctors attempted to examine her at the hospital, she became combative and refused treatment. The baby showed no signs of trauma, but an autopsy would later reveal something far more sinister. This child had never been born to Tiffany Hall. As Tiffany planned an elaborate funeral for the baby she named Taylor Horn, her best friend Jamela remained missing, and 3 small children were asking their father where their mother had gone. Nobody could have imagined that the answers to both mysteries lay in the twisted mind of the woman organizing the funeral, a woman who had spent weeks planning the perfect crime, only to be undone by her own desperate need for attention. To understand the magnitude of Tiffany Hall's betrayal, you have to first understand the bond she had forged with Jamela Tunstall. Theirs was a friendship born in the crucible of childhood trauma, tempered by years of shared struggles, and ultimately destroyed by jealousy, mental illness, and an obsession that would prove deadly. They met in kindergarten, 2 little girls who recognized something familiar in each other's eyes. It was the look of children who had learned early that the world was not a safe place, that adults could not be trusted, and that survival often meant making yourself invisible. Jamela's childhood reads like a case study in institutional failure. Bounced from foster home to foster home, she carried her few possessions in plastic garbage bags, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. The system designed to protect her instead taught her that she was disposable, that her value was measured by how little trouble she caused. But in the classroom, she found something precious: stability. School became her sanctuary, the one place where she could disappear into books and dream of a different life. It was there she met Tiffany, and their friendship became the anchor both girls desperately needed. Tiffany's trauma was different, but equally devastating. Where Jamila faced the cold indifference of institutions, Tiffany battled the demons of family violence. By age 14, she had already been through the juvenile justice system, adjudicated as a delinquent for assaulting her own mother in a rage that spoke to deeper psychological wounds.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
The pattern of Tiffany's adolescence was one of escalating defiance. Missed curfews, failed drug tests, chronic truancy. Teachers described her as intelligent but volatile, capable of moments of startling insight followed by explosions of rage that left everyone walking on eggshells. Despite their troubles, the two girls found in each other something approximating family. Neighbors would later recall how they were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, sharing clothes, secrets, and dreams of escape from the poverty that defined their world. They were like sisters, one neighbor would later tell reporters. Closer than sisters, really. You never saw one without the other. This closeness would make Tiffany's eventual betrayal all the more shocking and all the more devastating. By September 2006, both women had become mothers, but their experiences couldn't have been more different. For Jamila, motherhood represented redemption, a chance to give her children the love and stability she had never known. For Tiffany, it had become a source of shame, loss, and growing resentment. Jamila's journey to stable motherhood hadn't been easy. She had temporarily lost custody of her older children after using excessive physical discipline, a heartbreaking echo of her own traumatic upbringing. But instead of surrendering to despair, she used the crisis as motivation for change. She attended parenting classes, learned new coping strategies, and fought to regain custody of her children. Her dedication paid off. By 2006, Jamila had achieved something that seemed impossible just years earlier: stability. She had her children back, an apartment of her own, and dreams of becoming a photographer. She used her tax refund to buy a car, a symbol of mobility and independence that represented her growing confidence in the future. 7 months pregnant with her fourth child, a daughter she planned to name after herself, Jamila was finally experiencing the joy of anticipated motherhood. She talked excitedly about baby clothes, cribs, and the photography career she hoped to build once her daughter was born. Tiffany's experience with motherhood had been markedly different and infinitely darker. Her first pregnancy at 16 had ended in tragedy when her infant daughter suffered severe abuse that left the child permanently disabled. Medical records revealed injuries so extensive that by age 7, the child still wore diapers and could only communicate through unintelligible sounds. Though charges were initially filed, they were later dropped due to insufficient evidence, and the state eventually returned both of Tiffany's daughters to her care. But the damage was done, both to the children and to Tiffany's already fragile psyche. As she watched her best friend thrive in motherhood, something toxic began to grow in Tiffany's mind. Jamila had everything Tiffany wanted: healthy children, a stable home, and the respect of their community. Most importantly, Jamila was carrying the baby girl Tiffany desperately wanted but could never have naturally. It was around this time that Tiffany began telling people she was pregnant. The lie started small, casual mentions to neighbors and friends about morning sickness and doctor's appointments. She began wearing loose clothing and patting her stomach with pillows. Most significantly, she told her boyfriend Keith Horn, who was deployed with the Navy, that he was going to be a father. Keith was thrilled. He had been stationed overseas for months, and the promise of fatherhood gave him something to look forward to during his service. He began planning leave time for the birth, buying baby supplies, and dreaming of the family they would build together. But Tiffany knew her deception couldn't last forever. As her supposed due date approached, she became increasingly desperate. She needed a baby, not just any baby, but one that looked like it could plausibly be hers. She needed Jamila's baby, and she was willing to do anything to get it. The seeds of murder were planted in the mundane details of everyday life. For weeks before September 16th, Tiffany Hall had been preparing for the crime that would destroy 2 families and shock a nation. Her planning was meticulous, methodical, and absolutely chilling in its premeditation. She started with research, spending hours at the public library using their computers to look up information about fetal development, cesarean procedures, and emergency childbirth. She printed articles about how to deliver a baby at home and studied diagrams of the female reproductive system with the focus of a medical student. Next came the supplies. Over the course of several weeks, Tiffany made seemingly innocent trips to various stores, carefully spreading her purchases across multiple locations to avoid suspicion. She bought scissors, sharp, surgical-grade scissors that could cut through flesh and tissue. She purchased rubbing alcohol, gauze, and a bulb syringe, creating what amounted to a makeshift delivery kit. But the most chilling aspect of her preparation was psychological. Tiffany began subtly isolating Jamila from other friends and family members, positioning herself as the pregnant woman's primary support system. She offered to babysit more frequently, visited more often, and gradually became indispensable to Jamila's daily routine. She was always there, one neighbor would later recall. Always offering to help, always asking about the baby. We thought she was just being a good friend. The manipulation was expert level. Tiffany knew exactly how to exploit Jamila's vulnerabilities, her desire for friendship, her gratitude for help with the children, her loneliness as a single mother in a dangerous neighborhood. Every act of kindness was actually reconnaissance, every favor a step closer to the ultimate betrayal. On September 15th, the day before the murder, Tiffany made her final preparations. She cleared her schedule, ensured her own daughters would be safely elsewhere, and double-checked her supplies. She had even prepared a story for afterwards, the tale of giving birth in the park that would initially throw investigators off the scent. Everything was in place. All she needed now was to get Jamila alone. September 16, 2006. The last day of Jamila Tunstall's life began with the ordinary rhythms of motherhood. She woke early, prepared breakfast for her 3 children, and walked Damond to the school bus stop as she did every morning. 7-year-old Damond waved goodbye from the bus window, unaware that he would never see his mother alive again. The afternoon brought an invitation that would prove fatal. Tiffany called to invite Jamila over to her mother's house in Belleville, a neighboring community. It was presented as a casual visit, just 2 friends hanging out while the kids played. Jamila saw no reason to refuse. After all, this was her best friend, the woman she trusted more than anyone else in the world. When Jamila arrived at the house, she was relaxed and unsuspecting. At 7 months pregnant, she moved slowly but was in good spirits, excited about the approaching birth of her daughter. She had no idea that her best friend had been planning her murder for weeks. The attack came without warning. According to Tiffany's later confession, she waited until Jamila was settled and comfortable before striking. The weapon was a table leg, heavy, blunt, and devastating when wielded with intent to kill. The first blow caught Jamila completely off guard, sending her tumbling to the floor. But Tiffany didn't stop there. She struck again and again, raining down blows until her best friend lay unconscious and bleeding on the living room floor. Even then, the horror was just beginning. With Jamila unconscious but still alive, Tiffany bound her hands and feet with duct tape. The same tape she would later use to silence her friend's screams when she briefly regained consciousness. The image of Jamila waking up, bound and helpless, only to be struck down again, represents one of the most chilling aspects of this already horrific crime. What happened next defies comprehension. Tiffany dragged her best friend's body into the bathroom and, using the scissors she had purchased weeks earlier, performed a crude cesarean section on the living woman. Jamila was conscious for at least part of this mutilation, aware that her best friend was cutting her baby from her womb. The medical examiner would later determine that Jamila died from massive blood loss, meaning she was alive and aware as her baby was stolen from her body. Her final moments were filled not just with physical agony, but with the psychological torment of ultimate betrayal. With Jamila's blood still on her hands, Tiffany took the baby girl and began the next phase of her plan. She wrapped Jamila's body in a shower curtain and dragged it out to her car, driving to a vacant lot behind her house where she dumped her best friend's remains in the high weeds. Then, with a newborn baby in her arms, she drove to Frank Holton Park to stage the scene that would initially throw investigators off her trail. By the time paramedics arrived at Frank Holton Park, Tiffany Hall had transformed from cold-blooded killer into grieving mother. Keith Horn, Tiffany's boyfriend, received leave from the Navy to attend what he believed was his daughter's funeral. He traveled from his military base to East St. Louis, heartbroken over the loss of the child he had never met but had already begun to love. The funeral itself was a masterclass in manipulation. Tiffany played the grieving mother perfectly, accepting condolences and flowers from well-meaning community members who had no idea they were being deceived. She spoke eloquently about her daughter, describing dreams she had for the child and the pain of losing her so soon. But cracks were beginning to show in Tiffany's facade. The funeral director later told police that her behavior struck him as odd. She arrived 2 hours late to her own baby's service, and just minutes before it was scheduled to begin, she asked if it could be rescheduled so more family members could attend. Only 2 people had shown up, a turnout that seemed to genuinely surprise her. Most telling of all, Tiffany seemed more concerned with the logistics of the funeral than with the supposed loss of her child. She asked detailed questions about the burial process, the cemetery plot, and when the body would be interred, displaying a level of detached interest that struck witnesses as inappropriate for a grieving mother. It was Keith Horn who would ultimately expose the truth. On the evening of September 21st, as they sat together after the funeral service, Tiffany made a confession that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "That wasn't my baby," she told him quietly. "I killed Jamela to get her baby." Keith Horn's world shattered in that moment. The woman he loved, the woman he had planned to marry and build a family with, had just confessed to one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. She had murdered her best friend and stolen her unborn child, then convinced him to take leave from military duty to attend a fake funeral. To his credit, Keith did the right thing. Despite his shock and heartbreak, he immediately contacted the Illinois State Police. That same night, officers arrived at Tiffany's residence and placed her under arrest for the murder of Jamela Tunstall. Initially, Tiffany attempted to maintain her innocence, but faced with Keith's testimony and mounting physical evidence, her resolve quickly crumbled. In custody, she began to unravel the web of lies she had spent weeks constructing, revealing the true scope of her crimes. Her confession was chilling in its matter-of-fact tone. She described the murder of Jamela with the same emotional detachment one might use to describe a grocery shopping trip. She explained how she had planned the crime for weeks, purchasing supplies and rehearsing her cover story. She detailed the brutal assault with the table leg, the binding with duct tape, and the horrific cesarean section performed on her conscious victim. But investigators quickly realized that Tiffany's confession, horrific as it was, might not be complete. Jamela had been missing for 6 days, but she had 3 other children who remained unaccounted for. When pressed about their whereabouts, Tiffany initially claimed she had returned them to their father after picking them up from school. This lie would prove to be her last. On September 22nd, the day after Tiffany's arrest, police returned to Jamela's apartment in the John DeShields housing complex. They were looking for photographs of the missing children to distribute to media outlets, hoping to generate leads about their whereabouts. The apartment appeared normal at first glance. Toys scattered on the floor, children's clothes folded in drawers, the ordinary detritus of family life. But as Detective Williams would later testify, something felt wrong the moment they entered. The smell hit them gradually, a sweet, cloying odor that experienced investigators recognized immediately. It was the smell of death, but in an apartment complex known for its poor maintenance and sanitation issues, it wasn't immediately alarming. Police spent hours in the apartment that first day, gathering evidence and searching for clues about the children's disappearance. They walked past the washing machine and dryer dozens of times, never imagining that the objects of their search were just feet away, hidden in the very appliances Jamela had used to care for her family. It wasn't until the following day, when the smell had become overwhelming, that investigators realized they needed to expand their search. Detective Williams made the decision to check the appliances, expecting to find rotting food or perhaps a dead animal that had crawled inside to die. Instead, he found something that would haunt him for the rest of his career. 7-year-old Demond was crammed into the washing machine, his small body contorted to fit in the confined space. 2-year-old Ivan was in the dryer, while baby Janella, just 10 months old, was stuffed into the remaining space like discarded laundry. All 3 children had been dead for nearly a week, their bodies decomposing in the very machines their mother had used to wash their clothes and care for their needs. The symbolism was not lost on investigators. Tiffany had literally treated these children like refuse, hiding them in appliances as if they were nothing more than garbage to be disposed of. When confronted with this discovery, Tiffany's final facade crumbled completely. In her second confession, she revealed the full scope of her crimes, describing how she had murdered not just Jamila and her unborn daughter, but the 3 children as well. Tiffany's confession about the children's murders was delivered with the same chilling detachment she had used to describe killing their mother. According to her statement, the murders occurred on September 18th, just 2 days after she had killed Jamila and 3 days before the fake funeral. Her method was as calculated as it was cruel. She contacted the children's father, Ivan Collins, and told him that Jamila wanted to see her kids. This lie allowed her to pick up 7-year-old Demond, 2-year-old Ivan, and 10-month-old baby Janella without raising suspicion. The children knew Tiffany well. She had been their mother's best friend, a constant presence in their lives, someone they trusted completely. When she told them it was time for a bath, they likely followed her willingly to the bathroom where their mother had died just 2 days earlier. What happened next represents the ultimate betrayal of innocence. One by one, Tiffany drowned the children in the same bathtub where she had performed the cesarean section on their mother. Some sources suggest she may have drugged them with cough syrup first, though this detail was never confirmed through toxicology reports due to the advanced state of decomposition. Demond, the oldest at 7, may have understood what was happening to him. He had been looking forward to starting 2nd grade, had dreams of becoming a policeman, and loved playing with his little green riding tractor in the courtyard of the housing complex. His final moments were spent in the hands of someone he trusted, someone his mother had trusted, someone who saw him not as a human being, but as an obstacle to be eliminated. 2-year-old Ivan and baby Janella were too young to comprehend their fate, but their deaths were no less tragic. They died not understanding why the woman who had babysat them countless times was suddenly hurting them, why the water that should have been warm and comforting had become an instrument of death.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
After drowning each child, Tiffany moved their bodies to the laundry area of the apartment. The washing machine and dryer were located in a small alcove off the main living area. Appliances that Jamila had probably used just days before to wash her children's school clothes and prepare for the new baby. The decision to hide the bodies in the appliances speaks to Tiffany's psychological state. She wasn't just disposing of evidence. She was symbolically erasing the children's humanity, treating them as objects to be hidden away rather than human beings deserving of dignity, even in death. For 5 days, the children's bodies remained in those machines while the community searched for them. Police officers, social workers, and volunteers scoured the neighborhood, posted flyers, and contacted media outlets, all while the victims lay just yards away from where the investigation was being coordinated. The discovery of the children's bodies transformed an already shocking murder case into something approaching the unthinkable. The community of East St. Louis, no stranger to violence, struggled to comprehend how someone could not only murder her best friend, but also kill 3 innocent children who had done nothing more than trust the wrong person. Tiffany Hall was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of intentional homicide of an unborn child. The charges carried the possibility of the death penalty, making her case one of the most serious capital prosecutions in Illinois state history. But Tiffany's family, led by her attorney James Gomrick, moved quickly to avoid a death penalty trial. They acknowledged that while she was legally competent to stand trial, psychological evaluations revealed significant mental health issues, including an IQ in the 70s that placed her in the borderline intellectual disability range. More importantly, they reached out to Jamila's family to gauge their feelings about capital punishment. In a display of grace that shocked observers, Jamila's relatives indicated they did not want to see Tiffany executed. As one family member explained to reporters, "I just think she should be in prison for the rest of her life to think about what she did. God's going to have the upper hand." This decision by Jamila's family to oppose the death penalty speaks to their character and their understanding that Tiffany's execution would not bring back the 5 lives that were lost. It also reflects a broader truth about many communities affected by violence. Sometimes the families of victims are more interested in ensuring their loved ones are remembered than in seeking vengeance against their killers. On June 10, 2008, Tiffany Hall entered a guilty plea to all charges in exchange for a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the judge asked if she understood the magnitude of her sentence, she replied simply, "I will never get out." The courtroom was packed with family members, community leaders, and media representatives who had followed the case since its shocking discovery nearly 2 years earlier. Many had come expecting to see remorse, an explanation, or at least some sign that Tiffany understood the enormity of her crimes. Instead, they witnessed the same emotional detachment that had characterized her confession. Tiffany showed no visible emotion as the sentence was read, no tears for her victims, no acknowledgement of the devastation she had caused to multiple families. In the wake of Tiffany's sentencing, the East St. Louis community struggled to make sense of what had happened. This wasn't a case of stranger danger or random violence. This was a betrayal that struck at the heart of one of humanity's most fundamental relationships, friendship. The impact on both families was devastating and long-lasting. Tiffany's own daughters, already dealing with the trauma of their mother's abuse, were returned to foster care and faced the additional burden of being associated with one of the most notorious crimes in their city's history. Keith Horn, the Navy serviceman who had been deceived into believing he was the father of Jamella's stolen baby, struggled with guilt and trauma. He had not only been manipulated by someone he loved, but had unknowingly participated in a funeral for a murder victim. The psychological impact of this betrayal would follow him for years. Jamella's extended family faced the impossible task of moving forward without her and the children, while also grappling with the knowledge that their murders had been committed by someone they had welcomed into their home. The trust they had placed in Tiffany had been absolute, making the betrayal all the more devastating. The community response was remarkable in its unity. Over 700 people attended Jamella's funeral on September 29, 2006, filling the church to capacity and spilling out onto the sidewalks. The service was a celebration of her life and her dreams, particularly her hopes for her children and her ambitions to become a photographer. In just 3 days, the community raised over $30,000 to cover the burial expenses for Jamella and her children, a testament to how deeply their deaths had affected everyone who had known them. The fundraising effort was organized entirely by volunteers, many of whom had never met the victims but were moved by the tragedy to take action. Perhaps most poignantly, Jamella's stillborn daughter, the baby who had been cut from her womb, was later exhumed and reburied alongside her mother and siblings in Millstadt, Illinois. The family that had been torn apart by violence was finally reunited in death, buried together in a peaceful cemetery far from the chaos and poverty that had defined their lives. The case of Tiffany Hall and Jamella Tunstall forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil, the failure of social systems, and the capacity for human beings to commit unspeakable acts against those they claim to love. Tiffany's crimes cannot be explained away by poverty, mental illness, or childhood trauma, though all of these factors undoubtedly played a role in shaping her psychology. Millions of people face similar challenges without resorting to murder, let alone the systematic elimination of an entire family. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the level of premeditation involved. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of temporary insanity. Jamella's trust in Tiffany was absolute precisely because she had so few other people she could rely on. In a community with better resources, better schools, better healthcare, better social services, she might have had a wider network of support that could have provided protection or at least an alternative to depending so heavily on one friendship. Today, more than 17 years after the murders, Tiffany Hall remains incarcerated at the Logan Correctional Center in Lincoln, Illinois. At 40 years old, she will spend the rest of her life behind bars, never again able to hurt anyone beyond the prison walls. But this case should not be remembered primarily for its perpetrator. Instead, it should serve as a memorial to 5 lives that were cut short by betrayal and violence. Jamella Tunstall, 23 years old, who overcame a difficult childhood to create a stable home for her children and pursue her dreams of becoming a photographer. She died protecting the unborn daughter she had already begun to love. Damond, 7 years old, who loved riding his green tractor and dreamed of becoming a policeman. He was about to start second grade and had shown his mother's same quiet determination to succeed despite the challenges of his environment. Ivan, 2 years old, who was just beginning to discover the world around him, learning to talk and walk and express his own personality. He loved playing with his older brother and following his mother around their apartment. Janella, 10 months old, who represented pure innocence and unlimited potential. She had her mother's smile and her father's eyes, and her future was stolen before she could even learn to speak her first word. And the unnamed baby girl, who died before she could take her first breath outside her mother's womb, but who had already been loved and welcomed by a family that was eagerly awaiting her arrival.